Just when it seemed like the royal rift had begun to settle, a shocking revelation detonated behind closed palace doors. Meghan Markle, long at odds with royal tradition, was reportedly left reeling, physically collapsing, after Prince Harry confirmed a devastating truth. Diana's sacred childhood home had been legally secured, and not for both sons, but only for William. The symbolism, the secrecy, the exclusion, it all came crashing down in one stunning blow. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. It began quietly, almost like a whisper that refused to fade. Rumors moved through the corridors of influence, hinting that something significant was happening with Diana's ancestral estate. Not a renovation, not a commemorative project, something far more permanent. Meghan and Harry had long imagined that one day the home could become a place of reflection for their children, a bridge to the grandmother they would never meet, a sanctuary of memory and healing. Instead, they were confronted with the chilling reality that the final document had already been signed, sealed, and filed without their knowledge, without their presence, without their names. When Harry finally spoke the words aloud, the truth struck with such force that it felt like history itself had turned against them. The collapse wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological. It was the weight of being reminded once again that in the ancient machinery of monarchy, not every heartache is allowed to matter equally. For a brief moment it had seemed as though the brothers were finding a fragile path back to each other, quietly rebuilding trust after years of fractures and misunderstandings. But this decision, this single, irreversible act tore open wounds that had never fully healed. Diana's childhood home had always been whispered about as the symbolic key to her memory. The one place untouched by performance, expectation and ceremony. To see it secured solely in William's future was to feel the past locked away from Harry forever. Aides spoke cautiously, yet even their guarded words revealed the depth of the shock. Meghan wasn't shattered by bricks and land. She was shattered by what it represented, a rewriting of legacy, a message delivered without saying a word. Or not just exclusion, but deliberate distance. A reminder that no matter how deeply she tried to honor Diana's spirit, the gates of that memory would never open for her children. And while Harry tried to steady her, he was wrestling with something darker: guilt, anger, confusion, and the painful suspicion that this had been in motion long before he ever learned about it. And so the moment did not end. It lingered, it deepened. Because if this was the beginning, what else had been planned without them knowing? What other decisions had already been carved in silent stone, waiting to be revealed at the precise moment they would hurt most? But behind this emotional collapse lies a far deeper betrayal, one that traces back to Diana's private wishes and a royal strategy crafted in the shadows. For years, Diana's sealed letters and private journals had been a source of speculation. But now, one previously classified document has emerged, and its contents could explain why William alone was chosen to inherit her sacred childhood home. A carefully worded directive, hidden from the public, may have just shattered the Sussexes' hopes forever. The discovery wasn't accidental. Tucked inside a lead box marked with a faded royal insignia, the letter had gone undetected for decades, filed away under vague archival codes. It was only during a routine reorganization of royal records, led by a discreet team of archivists operating under Charles's supervision, that the document surfaced. The envelope, yellowed with time, bore Diana's unmistakable handwriting. Its contents, according to those who read it, delivered a quiet but unshakable blow. Diana, with her usual candor and foresight, had penned a message not for the world but for her sons. In it, she made a statement that would ignite a firestorm, that William was to carry the torch of her upbringing, the custodian of a legacy too delicate to be politicized, too sacred to be divided. The letter did not name Harry as unworthy, but what it didn't say spoke volumes. Diana's tone, reflective and firm, praised William's measured heart and unshakable steadiness, qualities she believed would preserve the spirit of their family in a world she knew could be cruel and performative. Harry, she noted, had a wild soul, one she cherished, but one she feared would struggle under the weight of symbolism. This was not judgment. It was prophecy. And that prophecy now carried consequences. When the document landed in the hands of King Charles and Princess Anne, the reaction was immediate and hushed. Emergency meetings were called without announcement. Legal experts were summoned under strict confidentiality. The letter didn't instruct the family explicitly on the estate, but it said enough to serve as a royal compass. Suddenly, the property's future, once debated, now seemed predetermined, and in that swift moment of clarity, strategy solidified. William would be the estate's sole inheritor. Not out of favoritism, they insisted, but fidelity to Diana's unspoken vision. None of this had reached Meghan, not until the days leading up to her collapse. When she was finally told, the timing could not have been more cruel. It came not with explanation, but with finality. There would be no room for appeal, no renegotiation of legacy. Meghan was blindsided by the revelation not because Diana had a preference, but because the letter proved. The palace had always known where this was going. It hadn't been a discussion. It had been a plan, quietly unfolding while the world looked elsewhere. Insiders say that moment when the letter's existence came to light redefined the royal property strategy in one stroke. The conversations changed, the tone changed, and with it, the Sussexes were left not just outmaneuvered, but out of place in a royal narrative they thought they still had a role in shaping. And as Meghan struggled to process the weight of this revelation, the palace was already moving ahead with a bold and irreversible PL. And, in the dead of night, under the veil of utmost secrecy, a private council ratified a decision that would send shockwaves across the monarchy. Diana's estate, legally secured in William's name only. No shared inheritance, no Sussex clause, just one heir chosen and protected by royal decree. It was not a grand ceremony, nor a moment of royal tradition proudly on display. It was, instead, the key end of decision made behind closed doors, under tight surveillance, with only a handful of senior royals and trusted legal advisors allowed to bear witness. Sandringham became the stage for what many now refer to as one of the most defining legal maneuvers of the decade, one designed not to honor transparency, but to finalize control. The legal transfer documents were quietly drafted, reviewed, and signed in a matter of hours. There was no press release, no announcement, not even a whisper to those who would be most affected. And by the time word reached Meghan and Harry, it was already too late. The ink had dried, the estate had moved beyond their reach. The home had not been simply handed over, it had been enshrined, locked within a newly established preservation trust, with William as its sole living custodian, not a trustee, not a ceremonial figurehead, a legal guardian of his mother's childhood sanctuary, with full rights to govern its access, future, and symbolism. Palace advisors argued that the move was meant to protect Diana's legacy, to shield the estate from external influence, and to prevent it from becoming a media battleground. But for those watching closely, the message couldn't have been clearer. This was not about land. This was about loyalty, lineage, and legacy. Harry, blindsided by the speed and finality of the decision, was left to deliver the crushing news to Meghan. Insiders said he was visibly shaken, not angry, not explosive, just hollowed out. He had once believed that whatever happened between him and his brother, there would be at least one piece their mother left for both of them. That belief shattered with a single clause buried deep within the transfer, that no amendments, co-guardianships or third-party claims would ever be considered. It was a clean severance dressed in legal language, and it carried a cold finality. For Meghan, the emotional impact was immediate and unforgiving. After years of struggling to carve a place within a oil system that seemed built to reject her, this was the loudest signal yet. She was not only excluded from Diana's memory, she was erased from its future, and with Harry forced to serve as the bearer of that truth, the emotional toll between them was as sharp as it was silent. The couple had faced public scrutiny, media warfare, and institutional rejection. But nothing pierced quite like this, no. Thing ever felt so intimate and so deliberately distant. This wasn't just a legal move. It was a defining moment that reinforced long-standing suspicions once whispered behind closed doors and written between the lines of public statements. That there were parts of the monarchy that had never truly opened their doors to the Sussexes. That when legacy was being cemented, they were not part of the blueprint. But the fallout from this decision wouldn't stay behind palace walls, because Meghan's emotional spiral led to a confrontation no one saw coming. It wasn't just about a house. It was about legacy, identity, and the brutal reminder that no matter how far she'd come, Meghan would never be fully accepted. In a private setting far from public view, Meghan broke down in front of key aides Mac, ing one final plea that would leave everyone in stunned silence. The collapse was not sudden, it was a slow unraveling. A build-up of silences, of carefully avoided glances, of decisions made behind gilded doors. When the finality of the estate transfer was confirmed and Harry, drained and torn, delivered the news, Meghan reportedly sat motionless for a long time. Then the words spilled out, raw and unfiltered. She was his mother too. Why doesn't that matter? It wasn't a question for policy or legal clarification. It was the kind of cry that exposed a wound that had been ignored for far too long. Royal aides, caught off guard by the intensity of her reaction, found themselves standing in a room that no longer obeyed protocol, only grief, desperate for anything that might soften. The blow, Meghan reportedly proposed a ceremonial clause. Not a reversal, not a confrontation, just a small, private provision allowing her daughter, Lilibet, the symbolic right to visit the estate. Not to claim it, not to disrupt it, only to step into her grandmother's world, to touch the soil Diana once walked. But the answer was chilling in its calmness. Palace officials responded with a blanket statement. The documents were irreversible. The estate's trust could not accommodate exceptions. The preservation clause had already been invoked, and with it, the gates had been closed indefinitely. Meghan turned to the only person left who could fight for her Harry. In that moment, she urged him to act, to use his name, his lineage, his voice. But what came next wasn't resistance, it was hesitate. Harry, still haunted by his mother's memory, understood all too well what it meant to confront his brother in public. The idea of entering a legal battle over his mother's legacy, a legacy both precious and painful, left him paralyzed. Family loyalty clashed with unresolved trauma. And in that paralysis, Meghan saw something shift. Insiders later described this episode as the final emotional fracas. Seizure between the Sussexes and the institution they once called home. It wasn't about status or inheritance anymore. It was about what was left unspoken, who had been left behind, and the irrevocable feeling that some doors were never meant to open. Royal aides, visibly shaken by the depth of Meghan's breakdown, were reportedly instructed to never speak of the incident. It was buried like so many. Uncomfortable truths, hidden beneath royal silence and sealed corridors. But the tremors didn't stop there. Because while Meghan's heartbreak rippled through her inner circle, another confrontation was already brewing, one far more direct and far more explosive. Yet while Meghan's breakdown sent tremors through her inner circle, the real shock was still to come when Harry confronted his brother face. Behind the gates of Kensington, brothers stood divided not by politics, but by memory. What was meant to be a quiet discussion became a volcanic argument. Harry demanded answers, William stood firm. And in that moment, the ghosts of Diana's past and the kingdom's future collided. Harry had arrived without ceremony, without aids, and without warning. There was no scheduled meeting, no artiers to prepare the setting. He walked into Kensington not as a prince on royal business, but as a son seeking justice for a legacy he believed had been stolen. William, ever composed, had not expected the confrontation, but he knew immediately what it was about. The air between them was already charged before the first word was spoken. What followed was not just a clash of emotions, but a tell of truths. Two men who loved the same mother, yet saw her memory through entirely different lenses. Harry wasted no time. He laid it all bare: his pain, Meghan's collapse, the silence that surrounded the decision, and the devastating feeling of being erased from the very place that defined Diana's origins. But it was when he uttered the phrase, "You've allowed them to rewrite her love," that the atmosphere shifted. William, his voice low but deliberate, pushed back. This wasn't about exclusion, he said. It was about preservation. He explained the trust, the letter, the need to protect their mother's memory from being politicized or diluted. But to Harry, those were just curated words masking a deeper truth. The monarchy had drawn a line, and he was on the outside of it. The argument, eye rolled, emotions tightening like a vice. Witnesses later described raised voices and drawn expressions, the kind of exchange that would never be seen in public, but would shape royal history in private. William, normally restrained, was visibly frustrated. Harry, torn between rage and grief, refused to relent. The conversation wasn't just about property. It was about loyalty, identity, and the quiet war that had grown louder with every sealed document and silent glance. No apology was given, no understanding reached. After more than an hour behind closed doors, the conversation ended not with compromise, but with silence, a long, suffocating pause, followed by the sound of a door closing harder than it should have. Kensington had witnessed many royal storms before, but this one was different. It wasn't just a rift. It was a fracture that seemed to have broken something that may never be repaired. And still, not a single statement was released. Not a word to the press. But inside the family, it was clear. The distance between the brothers had never felt colder, and while the world remained unaware of what had truly transpired within those walls, the consequences had already begun to ripple. Because not far away, beyond the spotlight and behind royal protocol, another figure had been watching quietly and was preparing to intervene. But as the brothers went their separate ways, another power was watching from the sidelines and preparing to intervene. While the monarchy watched the Sussex storm from afar, Catherine, Princess of Wales, made a quiet but bold move. In a private visit to the estate, she left behind a symbolic token meant not for William but for Lilibet. It was an act of empathy the palace never approved, and it may have changed everything. Catherine knew the estate had become a battlefield of silent warfare, a place now burdened with royal decisions that had deeply wounded a family already fractured. While most remained behind thick walls of protocol and discretion, she chose a different path. Her visit to Diana's childhood home came unannounced, without any media attention, and with no official purpose. And yet its significance echoed far beyond the property walls. According to insiders, she didn't come as a future queen. She came as a mother. And what she did inside those quiet rooms that once belonged to Diana, left even the most loyal court ears stunned. On a simple windowsill in one of the sunlit chambers, Catherine allegedly placed a child's charm bracelet, silver, delicate, and inscribed with a single letter, L. There was no note, no official statement, no explanation. But those close to the royal household didn't need one. The meaning was unmistakable. It was a private acknowledgement, a gesture that transcended formality. Catherine had offered a silent connection between Diana and her granddaughter, bypassing the politics and decisions that had excluded the Sussexes. This wasn't an act of rebellion. It was something far more powerful, human compassion disguised as quiet defiance. When word of the visit reached William, he was reportedly taken aback. Sources close to him revealed a sense of conflict. On one hand, he understood the emotion behind her gesture. On the other, it directly interfered with the controlled messaging the palace had worked so meticulously to maintain. William's reaction wasn't fury, it was silence. And silence, within royal circles, can speak louder than any confrontation. But what Catherine had done could not be undone, and soon, the whispers began to rise. Staff at the estate noticed the arm, and while no one dared remove it, its presence disrupted the sterile narrative surrounding the transfer. Catherine's inner circle stood by her. Privately, one aide reportedly remarked, "Diana would have done the same," and perhaps that was the most pointed statement of all. In a family obsessed with legacy, symbolism, and control, this small personal act carried the emotional weight of everything the official documents had tried to suppress. It reminded those watching that amidst legal declarations and royal decrees, there were still hearts breaking quietly in the background, and that empathy, even when uninvited, had the power to rewrite a moment. But for the monarchy, this moment was dangerous. It introduced vulnerability into a carefully curated structure. And while Catherine's gestu reached across a chasm of hurt, it also exposed cracks the crown had worked tirelessly to conceal. The palace, already shaken by the public fallout, now faced an internal ripple it hadn't planned for. But while Catherine extended a quiet olive branch, King Charles had already enacted the next phase of a plan that would silence dissent for good. In a shocking turn of events, King Charles issued a sealed memorandum that left no room for interpretation. All future access to Diana's childhood estate restricted, protected, and closed to the public. A final wall was raised, not just around the estate, but around the memory of Diana herself. The order came without warning. It wasn't debated, voted on, or softened by diplomatic phrasing. It was a blunt directive issued from the top, signed in private chambers, and delivered to the necessary custodians in silence. Diana's childhood home, once a living emblem of vulnerability, tragedy, and connection, was now declared a private royal sanctuary. The message was unmistakable. Access would no longer be a matter of sentiment or symbolism. It would be privilege granted at the sole discretion of one man, and one man only, William. The echoes of the past, once shared in quiet reverence, would now be guarded behind locked gates and legal barriers. The memorandum restructured every policy governing the estate. Requests, even ceremonial ones, now required formal written appeals personally approved by the estate's sole custodian. A process designed not for function, but for control. The order went further. Meghan and Harry, previously listed as honorary members of the estate's archival trust, were officially removed. Their names were struck from all internal correspondence. No explanation was given, no apology issued, just a sudden disappearance from the ledger, erasing any remaining illusion of inclusion. Royal insiders were quick to describe the move for what it was: a decisive reclamation of the Diana narrative. One that ensured the monarchy, and not her younger son, would own the way her memory was institutionalized. Charles, long accused of being overshadowed by the legacy of his former wife, had now reasserted authority over her physical past. The decision, while icy in its execution, was received with quiet approval from senior royals. There was no gloating, but there was peace in the consolidation of control. The crown had drawn a final line in the sand, and this time there would be no bending. Inside the Sussex camp, however, the reaction was electric with fury. Not loud, not public, but deeply personal. Harry reportedly withdrew from further discussions with royal liaisons, cancelling previously planned engagements and ignoring messages from the palace. One aide close to the couple revealed that this was the moment. He gave up hope, not just for property or position, but for reconciliation. The door wasn't just closed, it had been sealed. This wasn't about physical exclusion anymore. It was about psychological finality, a declaration that the past would be curated by one side only, and the other would be left to mourn from the shadows. The estate had become more than land. It had become a line between what was once a family and what now stood as factions. And as the world waited for Harry and Meghan's response, the palace remained immovable, cloaked in silent confidence. But the world wasn't done watching, and neither was Meghan, who made one final desperate move. With the gates locked and Diana's legacy slipping away, Meghan Markle did the unthinkable. She went public. In an emotional open letter, she called out the monarchy, questioned the motives behind the estate's transfer, and made a final plea for the public to remember who Diana really was. The letter was not a carefully filtered press release passed through royal liaisons or palace approval. It was raw, direct, and published through a major international outlet known for refusing to bow to royal influence. Meghan bypassed the traditional UK tabloids, see oozing instead a global platform where her words could echo without interference. From the opening line, there was no mistaking the tone. This wasn't bitterness, it was heartbreak sharpened by betrayal. She wrote not only as a woman pushed out, but as a mother, trying to hold on to something meaningful for her children. She spoke of legacy not as a crown or a castle, but as a memory, a lineage of ashen, strength, and humanity, now barricaded behind legal walls. In her most piercing passage, Meghan referred to walls built from grief, a phrase that instantly went viral. She painted the estate not as a possession, but as a wound, one that could have been a bridge but was instead turned into a fortress. She didn't name names, but her implications were thunderous. The language was clear, the institution had made a choice, and in doing so, they had rewritten history to favor convenience over truth. But even as she stood outside the gates, figuratively and literally, Meghan made one final appeal not to the royals, but to the people. The reaction was immediate. Social media lit up with hashtags. Supporters around the world flooded timelines with photos of Diana, memories of her compassion, her independence, her defiance. The open letter had cracked something open because for the first time since the estate transfer, the public had been given a voice. And with that voice came fury, empathy, and fire. It was no longer just a royal matter. It had become a global reckoning of who controls a legacy and who gets to be remembered in it. Buckingham Palace refused to respond.
Silent.
Only intensified the storm. Analysts speculated that the refusal to issue a counter-statement was strategic, a bid to starve the story of fuel. But behind closed doors, insiders admitted the family was rattled. Catherine, meanwhile, was seen days later wearing Diana's bracelet, a quiet signal that did not go unnoticed. Whether it was solidarity, strategy, or something else entirely, it added another layer to the public's growing curiosity. William, for his part, remained stoically silent, adhering to the ancient royal doctrine, never explain, never complain. Still, many saw Meghan's letter not as a plea for change, but as her final bow in the royal narrative. A final act of agency in a story that had so often been written without her. She had used her voice not to reclaim Diana's estate, but to ensure Diana's story couldn't be edited without resistance. But even as the dust settled, one final whisper emerged from behind palace curtains suggesting Diana's legacy may not be sealed after all. In the shadows of royal archives, rumours swirl of a second, forgotten codicil, an unexecuted clause in Diana's private writings that could turn everything. Was her estate truly secured forever for William alone? Or is there one final twist yet to come, hidden in the vaults of a monarchy built on secrets? It began as a whisper inside archival circles, where scholars and legal historians sometimes trade quiet knowledge of what they're not supposed to see. An unnamed source, allegedly close to a former royal archivist, claimed that Diana had drafted an amendment before her death, a codicil that was never formally executed but was deeply personal in nature. In it, she reportedly outlined her desire for both of her sons to one day share in her legacy when the time is right. The words, if proven authentic, could dismantle the carefully constructed walls surrounding the estate's legal ownership and reframe everything that's unfolded. Since the memorandum from King Charles, the timing of this revelation couldn't be more volatile. Just as Meghan's open letter gripped public sentiment and the palace had doubled down on its silence, this shadowed document introduces doubt, hope, and chaos in equal measure. If such a codicil exists, it calls into question not just the legality of the estate's exclusive transfer to William, but the moral integrity of those who executed it. More than that, it reignites the debate over Diana's true wishes, who she was in private, and who she believed her sons would become. Did she, in the final months of her life, anticipate a fracture between them? Did she foresee that only one would be trusted to carry her memory while the other would be cast into exile? Royal historians are now raising the voices. What was once a cautious academic discussion has become a mounting demand for full transparency. They argue that Diana's personal archive Her journals, letters, and legal drafts should no longer be kept behind locked vaults controlled solely by royal hands. The public, they insist, has a right to know whether her final intentions have truly been honored or quietly erased in service of political convenience. And this time they are not alone. Meghan and Harry's legal team is reportedly investigating every lead. Quietly, meticulously, and with the assistance of private researchers and international legal counsel, they are pursuing any documentation, any witness, any shred of truth that might confirm the codicil's existence. And though the palace has remained tight-lipped, internal unease is growing. If the document surfaces and is deemed legitimate, the fallout would be unprecedented, potentially forcing a legal reassessment of the estate's future and triggering a global re-evaluation of Diana's posthumous narrative. Meanwhile, the monarchy continues to operate as if nothing has changed. But beneath the surface, something has cracked. Silence is no longer enough to quell the speculation. The public is watching, journalists are circling, and every unanswered question grows louder with time. Because this is no longer just about an estate or a memory. It's about truth withheld, and whether one woman's final words can still rise through the noise and reclaim the story that was always hers to tell. Because in the House of Windsor, even the past isn't buried without consequence, and Diana's final word may not have been spoken yet. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.